Concerning rhetoric, the art of communication, when we're talking to people, we want to first of all remember that they are people and that there is a respect that's due there. But there's also a fine art in being able to communicate properly, regardless of the kind of person you're talking to. So when dealing with people and the ideas that they exchange, there are a number of ways that we can either get things in improper order or mishandle certain topics over others and realize that this is affecting the way I'm talking about them, and as well the truth behind them, their relevance to reality. So in today's topic, we're going to be talking about the Texas Sharpshooter Fallacy, which
is just the best name ever.
Yeah, especially for us here in Arizona. We're cowboys by association, not by trade, but the point of emphasis is, and this is an illustration of it, when you shoot at a wall and then you draw the target around what you hit. And of course, this is a very parodized illustration, but we ask ourselves, okay, so how am I setting myself up to succeed in a way that isn't exactly true? Well, the way that people do this, how you commit this Texas sharpshooter fallacy, is when you overgeneralize areas you want to talk about, you make them as broad as possible, and then through the informal fallacy of overgeneralization, flip it on its head and say the issues that go against my position are super trivial, that they're not as relevant as they ought to be. Instead of letting everything stand or fall on its own merit, you overemphasize what you want to prove and you undermine what you don't want to be included in the conversation. And we read an example of this in the well, I guess...
Call it news? I guess.
Yeah, whatever it was. The reflection was on a certain individual, a Catholic French woman by the name Joan of Arc. What were the views of that, and how is this an example of this form of fallacy?
Right. So this came to my attention this week because I thought it was funny, and then the funniness turned into seriousness. But it began really funny where a theater, I think it was in England, was making a play about the life of Joan of Arc, and they decided to portray her as being non-binary. And their response to criticism, obviously there would be a lot of criticism to that, was, well, you know, it's art, so we can kind of portray her however we want. You know, artistic liberties happen in all sorts of biopics, and so this is just our artistic liberty. And at that point, it was just ridiculous and funny, but then science got involved and people decided to defend what this play was doing and not just say, well, it's an artistic expression, but to say, no, Joan of Arc really was non-binary. Now, that sounds like a crazy claim because it is a crazy claim. The whole point and reason in which we remember Joan of Arc is because she was a woman. If Joan of Arc was a man, then she actually wouldn't be. I mean, it would be pretty impressive because before the age of 19, she led multiple campaigns in war and won. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and there's a bit of embellishment as far as the reasons behind this. Some say that she had visions of her patron saint, and we as not only Protestants, but first and foremost, Christians would question the role of those who have gone to their heavenly reward interacting with this world in that way. We also would challenge some of the sources that would claim, you know, she got hit by an arrow and then alone in the battle pulled it out. She had help. But the point being made is she was a very significant figure in French history, and she's not the only one. There are also women throughout the Eurosphere, if you want to call it that. I'm not going to pronounce her name very well, shame to my ancestors, but Aethelflaed, I believe, the Lady of America, she was not America, but American, that's the term. She was a very prominent political leader who just decided not to remarry after her husband got killed. Now, again, as a self-avowed and proud descendant of Leif Erikson, some of her methods in combat and her political retribution towards her husband's killers were without a doubt brutal, and that just makes her more attractive in my eyes. But the point being made is just that. There are lots of examples in history of women, even in the Bible, like Deborah, who took these quote-unquote masculine roles.
Right.
But in the overgeneralization of a feminine figure in a masculine role, how far do they stretch that?
Right. So remember what this claim is. So when you call someone non-binary, what you are saying is that they are neither male nor female. You're not talking about their temperament, right? That's when Sean's saying that they're taking on masculine roles, that is what he's talking about. Their temperament and their societal roles tend to go against what the traditional understanding and expectation of women or men would be.
Doesn't mean they're incapable of it. It's just there's an expectation to certain jobs because of how you're equipped for it.
Absolutely. The modern day understanding of gender is no. If you perceive yourself a particular way, you are that thing.
Which is based on what, again?
Right. That is the Gnostic heresy, Gnostic dualism, which believes that there is a fundamental difference between who you are, your biology, and your, what you would call your psychology. So who you are cannot be figured out by simply what your body is or what society tells you. You could only figure it out through dramatic introspection into the real you, the supernatural you that is spirit.
Which, as we've seen and discussed in previous messages, can change on a day-by-day basis.
That's right, and usually does. So that's what the non-binary designation means. It doesn't mean, and you got to keep your eye on the ball when it comes to these rhetoric lessons, it doesn't mean they don't have to prove that Joan of Arc didn't fit into traditional gender roles. We agree with them. That's why she's in history. Right?
And attractive.
Yeah, right? They have to prove that Joan of Arc did not consider herself male or female. She thought she was in some ethereal, androgynous middle ground that doesn't fit into male or female categories.
Which is a worldview that was only and has only ever been expressed in the last decade,
right?
Let alone, even if we're going to grant, maybe half a century.
Right.
But to read that back into the Middle Ages, the Renaissance period, that requires a lot of evidence.
Right.
And we need to ask, is all the data being handled fairly, or are they emphasizing and de-emphasizing things at a disproportionate rate?
Right. And remember what Sean said about this fallacy. It's like shooting a wall and then drawing a bullseye around it. So it's just finding a point and then saying, this agrees with me, right? Overgeneralizing.
I got it perfectly.
I got it perfectly. Exactly what I would expect to see in history if I was right. I see, right? So they're overgeneralizing and they're making things out to be what they are not. This also is not a logical fallacy, but it's something...
an informal fallacy.
Right. I mean, I'm sorry, not the Texas Sharpshooter, but anachronism. We're also going to talk about anachronism.
That's just a factual error.
That's just a factual error. So what an anachronism is it's reading back into history your modern day understanding. So a good example of this would be, when Lord of the Rings came out, I remember a lot of people were freaking out.
The cartoon or the books?
Yeah, the films by Peter Jackson. So in the first Fellowship of the Ring movie, there was a clear, I think it was a Corvette driving in one of the scenes. That's an anachronism. That Corvette don't belong there, right? That is a modern day innovation driving around in a medieval era type movie, even though it's fantasy is clearly set in the medieval era.
Tolkien's world, and I know Amazon will challenge
didn't
this,
include Corvettes.
Yeah, or helicopters, which
Right.
is why there's an outtake of Boromir
Right.
walking up a mountain and a helicopter appears and they have to reshoot it because that would be false given the narrative they want to tell.
So an anachronism in history is when you're looking at something that's historical and you're reading into it a modern day innovation. So you're going to see both. I'll point them out to you in this article, which is, to be fair, well written. And that is...
They got grammar right.
Yeah, they got grammar right. And that's one thing that we always want to point out about rhetoric. Rhetoric is an art form, which means that some people can get it right in the sense that they're very good orators, but they're just wrong in everything they're saying, right? And they might incorporate fallacies to make their points stronger than they really are, or seem
eloquent
stronger.
in communicating my error.
That's right. A really, really eloquent heretic. Okay, so this is from the article. It says this. And medieval Christian models of feminine virtue paradoxically considered virginal women as masculine because it was believed men were better able to control their sexual urges. Okay, so you're seeing the seeds of this. How do we know that Joan of Arc wasn't exactly male or female? Well, she was a virgin, and virgins, being a virgin was kind of more of a masculine quality in that day. So therefore,
that's a quote.
This is a quote from the article.
This as a masculine trait because why? It communicated self-control.
Right.
I hope everyone, male or female, has that virtue, not necessarily men over women. And in fact, I think society would have a lot less excuse for the way it's portraying men if this was in fact the case. But notice this is almost a borderline straw man, but let's keep going.
All right. Joan called herself the maiden, but that isn't necessarily because she wanted to emphasize her femininity.
Diminishment.
She believed her virginity was crucial to her religious calling. She wore men's clothing, but that doesn't mean she thought of herself as male. Masculine clothing may have been a way to express her role as a military leader or a sexual unavailability. Though
or
it seems
they just didn't build women armor.
Yeah.
This was the exception.
Though it seems paradoxical, Joan likely understood her own maidenhood as a masculine trait. Now you see the move. May have. It's possible that she may have seen it as a non-binary trait. Her expression of gender was bound up in medieval Christian ideas about virginity, martyrdom, and divine instruction that doesn't correspond with the experiences of modern women or non-binary people. Joan was divinely inspired to lead France to victory and willing to die for her cause. This very debate over which gender box she might have ticked would be alien and inconsequential to her. That doesn't mean we can't relate to Joan's experience of gender, just that there's a whole spectrum of ways to relate. Women have a right to be inspired by Joan as a strong woman acting in defiance of a patriarchal society, but those of us who are queer or non-binary should also be able to see ourselves reflected in her transgression of gender roles and refusal to conform.
Okay. Transgression's a strong word.
Yeah. Now, earlier in this article, they also make a point that they, them, which is how non-binary people refer to, those are the pronouns that non-binary people utilize. They make the claim that people were referred to as theys and thems, individuals were referred to as theys and thems, even back in the 14th century. Now, what they don't point out is that, yeah, of course, when you don't know the gender of a person, you use the word they. So, for instance, before I knew the gender of the baby that is growing inside of my wife's womb, we referred to them as a them. But then when we figured out that it was a he, we started saying he because it's weird to say that someone is a they or a them when you know their gender. So
odd environment to find out you're having a boy, but congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So what you see in this article is you see multiple usages of this fallacy. So the points that they're drawing their bullseyes around is, well, they used they and them pronouns back in the 1400s. Well, it's an anachronism because they didn't mean they and them the way that you mean they and them, first off. Secondly, you are overemphasizing this usage. It actually has nothing to do with gender ideology whatsoever, right? You're making a point of it in order to demonstrate that you are correct. The other point that they're drawing a bullseye around is saying that, well, Joan of Arc was a virgin. And somehow, I'm still scratching my head on this one, somehow that makes her more masculine than feminine, and therefore she's not fully feminine or masculine, she's in the middle. And thirdly, she led an army and wore men's clothes. So all of these things point to the fact that she is non-binary, right? So they have these points and they're drawing bullseyes around. They're like, see, history vindicates me. It's very, very clear that Joan of Arc was a non-binary person. Now, they quickly backtrack on that a little bit and they say, well, you know, it's not that she would have necessarily ticked the box of non-binary if you put that in front of her, because she wouldn't have known what you meant, which undercuts their point. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but it totally undercuts their point of believing that this gender spectrum has always existed in the world. But at any rate, it undercuts their point, and they say, well, she wouldn't have checked the box, but she certainly would have felt that she doesn't neatly fit in male or female roles.
Which has anything to do with what exactly? That hasn't been defined.
That's right. It hasn't been defined, and this is all speculation. They're all just assuming things about Joan of Arc that aren't explicitly said. Once again, drawing circles around points that they have themselves shot at the wall.
Now, again, we don't just want to emphasize church history. We do admire the work that God did through Joan of Arc in a military sense, at least at face value, but we don't question her salvation, maybe the integrity of some of the embellishment of the stories around her. If you have follow-up questions about patron saints, feel free to ask. But we would be remiss if this didn't ultimately bring us back to Scripture. So do we have an example of this in action in the Bible as well? Well, indeed we do. Jesus pointed out the Pharisees and the scribes were committing this fallacy in a very lengthy tirade that he commits against them. This is, or you can all remember this one. Matthew 23:23. He points out to them, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites!" So you're holding standards to others that you yourselves aren't keeping. How is that demonstrated? How are you being inconsistent? "For you pay," here's the emphasis, "tithe of mint, anise, and cumin." Those are interesting words. What are they?
They're spices.
So even down to their spice gardens, they got 1 for the Lord, 9 for me. They make sure they tithe on the gross, not the net, of even their gardens.
Right.
But, as Jesus goes on to say, have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. This is the sharpshooter fallacy. If I emphasize, oh, I go to church, I call myself a Christian, I even am saved, does that excuse the fact that there are still things going on in my life that need to be brought in conformity with the glory and the character of God? See the point. I'm overemphasizing the things I want to talk about, my own self-righteousness, the things I am getting right, the Pharisees in their tithing habits, but are neglecting Micah 6:8. That's a problem. So note the issue here and why this fallacy needs to be kept and addressed. Now, before we go into the questions and conclude our rhetoric lesson for this week, what are some of the ways we need to be, as far as our own communication goes, aware of these issues? Because if I'm speaking from my own experience, I've done this without even realizing I'm doing it. People say, well, you're biased. Everyone's biased, otherwise they wouldn't believe anything. But the question is my bias making me commit this fallacy? Am I overemphasizing the things I want? And here's where the error comes in, dismissing things that actually need more attention.
Yeah, the best way to deal with this, because it is a very difficult one, like you said, Sean, it's very insidious. It could crop up, you're not even realizing that you're doing it, because we all do have biases and we all do have prejudices. The best way to avoid this one is before you speak, before you talk about a point that you're trying to make, listen to an opposing point, right? Listen to someone who has dealt with this and has opposed it from the other side. That will help you at least see a differing perspective, because oftentimes when we're talking about this fallacy, we're talking about two people taking the same data set and reading very different things into it. So what you want to be sure that you're doing is listen to the opposing side. How are they looking at that data set? How are they looking at the life of Joan of Arc? Or how are they looking at tithing to the Lord? What is the opposing position? And is there credence there? Is there something that I'm missing? Am I being unfair with the data or with the quotation or with the law that I'm emphasizing at the moment? And am I neglecting something that might be a little bit weightier? So you have to really introspect and look at your own argumentation and ask that question. And once again, this is something that happens all the time in interpersonal conflict, right? You will overemphasize certain points, like, for instance, a husband who just cheated on his wife, he'll be like, well, you know, I cook for you and I clean and I do these other things. Great, but you cheated on her. You know, you do need to look at that as well. You can't ignore that big plot point and just overemphasize these other ones, right? So we have to really be patient and look at these particular things. If somebody is doing this fallacy, if you notice them doing it, this is one of the more intricate ones. You can't just directly call them on it. So usually there's there's a ninja move to get around these types of fallacies. This one is just, you have to just be very, very direct to say, what about this, right? You have to point out a different perspective. And if you're dealing with someone, like I said, if you're dealing with someone who legitimately wants to talk to you, they want to deal with these things, they want to rationally look at these particular data sets, they'll listen to you. They'll be like, oh, okay, maybe I didn't see it that way. Or, okay, let's look at it a different way. But give a rational opposing perspective on what they're pointing out, right? That's the way that you do it. If you're on the spot, meaning someone has given you a data point that you were unaware of, this has happened to me many, many times, right? I'm sitting down with a Mormon, I'm sitting down with a Muslim, they're bringing out something and I'm like, whoa, you know, like the first time I ever heard about the Council of Nicaea, which is, again, the Texas Sharpshooter Fallacy for sure, I didn't know anything about it. I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know that there was a church council about the deity of Christ. That seems pretty corrupt to me. So and they were like, see, so the church has corrupted everything else, right? So if the church decided on this, they must have decided on everything. So I had to say, I don't really know what you're talking about. I need to go research that. And when I researched the Council of Nicaea and figured out exactly what it was, then I was able to bring that to their attention. So it does take a little bit of research and looking at the finer points, like Sean said, not just looking at one point, but looking at the whole. What exactly are we talking about, and are there different ways of looking at it?
All right, so let us know if that's all clear, and we'll look forward to talking to you again about more of these issues next week.